Yes, I'm Jim Puckett, the Executive Director of the Basel Action Network, which is an international organization that's working on waste trade, trying to prevent waste trade from going from the rich countries to the poorer countries. Been working on this for many, many years, and we have made some progress. Right now, we're really have some very difficult situations with plastic waste flowing across the world from north to south, from west to east. And it's unsustainable, it's unjust, and we have a lot of work to do to stop it. Right now, Vietnam, for example, is getting about 300,000 tons per year of plastic waste from the rest of the world. Most of that is coming from Japan, followed by the EU, UK, and the US. But most is coming from Japan. In fact, about the last month we had records of 14,000 tons in 1 month was coming from Japan alone. This is plastic waste that then ends up in Vietnam, and you have to deal with it. We can talk about the impacts of that.
What is the impact, do you think, to Vietnam?
The impacts can be really serious because one of the things people don't understand is that plastic is not just something that's benign, it is actually poison. So many of the chemicals that are used in plastic, we know that there's 16,000 different chemicals that are used, and 25% of them are hazardous. So when you receive this material, you're receiving hazardous material. And the other thing that people don't understand is that when you go to recycle it, which is supposedly why it's coming to Vietnam, you can only recycle part of it. 30 to 50% have to get dumped somewhere. These are fractions that are not economic or possible to recycle. So what happens is they get pushed out of the facilities in the night on trucks, get dumped on the waysides, sometimes get burned, sometimes open burning, sometimes burning in a boiler inside the factory. So it creates tremendous pollution. Whenever you burn plastic, you make something so much more toxic. And so this is what's happening all over the world, but particularly right now in Southeast Asia. Most of the waste that's flowing across the globe right now, it used to go to China, no more. China said no more. Most of it is now going to Malaysia, number 1, and Vietnam, number 2. So you are number 2 in Vietnam of being the dumping ground for this type of plastic waste. The impacts are terrible. The microplastics are also a problem. Every time you wash the material, in order to recycle it, you have to wash it. And that flush contains contaminants, but also microplastics that go into groundwater, into rivers, and eventually into the ocean. So these are some of the impacts of what you're going to be receiving. And again, you're talking about cancer-causing chemicals, reproductive effects, etc.
So since there are a lot of issues with the problem of the waste trade, plastic waste trade. So
Plastic what? Waste trade?
Waste trade?
Yeah.
So what's the global committee are doing to eliminating?
Well, in 2019, the world started to wake up a bit. Activists and journalists were showing what was going on after China said no more. The flood was like a tsunami going to Southeast Asia of plastic waste that China used to take in. So what happened is the Chinese businessmen moved down to Southeast Asia, set up the factories, and had all these problems where we see plastic waste everywhere now in the farmlands, on the areas outside of cities in Malaysia and Vietnam. So what the international community did when they saw those pictures and they realized, oh my God, we have a problem, is the Basel Convention first stepped in to say we need to control more of this waste under the Basel Convention. Before 2019, nobody was controlling plastic waste. It was just considered non-toxic, non-hazardous, don't worry about it. But the Basel Convention changed that. They said we are going to control anything that's mixed or contaminated. They did still say there's some waste that's not hazardous, which we would disagree with, but they started to control it. So that was a good first step. And I'm happy to say there's another second good first step that happened yesterday. when the European Union has completely banned the export of plastic. So we have 27 countries in Europe saying they're not going to export any type of plastic waste to developing countries, even the so-called non-hazardous. So that's a big move, and they also are going to require notification and consent before any exports can happen, even to developed countries in the OECD. But the developing countries, EU says no more plastic exports. But that ban won't kick in until 2 years.
Okay, what is your recommendation to Vietnamese government in order to reduce the impact of plastic waste to Vietnam?
Vietnam needs to take a lesson from China. I'm not saying China did everything right. They should have not allowed the material to move past their shores to Southeast Asia. But China was right in that they banned the import. They realized that the economics actually was costing their country more for the pollution, the cost of pollution and damage to human health. That was actually costing them more than they were making. And this is true for any country. So Vietnam should ban the import, and certainly they should enforce that ban. And right now they're not enforcing even the Basel Convention rules. They're allowing too much of the waste to come in, and much of that waste, we're certain, should be controlled under the Basel Convention, but the data is showing it's still flowing into Vietnam. And when we've notified Vietnam government about some of the shipments, actual shipments and container numbers and ships that are coming to them, they said, well, we'll let customs know, but then customs never did anything about it. So this is discouraging, because we in the NGO community for international cooperation, sometimes we get information, like I live in the US, I know what the US is doing, and we warn governments like Vietnam, and we say, hey, this ship is coming, you should look at it, check it, make sure that it's not hazardous, controlled plastic waste, and you should stop it if it is. But our warnings go unheeded. So this is not looking good. So countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, they should all be very diligent with their enforcement, but ultimately they should be banning the import.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.